Hey everybody, I'm Lon Stroshine, former public company executive turned lifestyle engineer. In 2022, I walked away from my job as a public company executive. I left without a safety net, without another job, without a backlog of clients, or without a resume. But I left anyway. I left because I knew the best days of my life were right in front of me, and they weren't going to be lived where I was standing. Since then, I've launched a best-selling book, coached thousands of elite performers around the world, hosted a top-rated podcast, moved my family across the country, and created a movement that has inspired the change in 1,000 lives. Look, if you're here, it's not an accident or an algorithm. It's you. If you've reached the top of your game and you feel stuck, if you'd trade what you have but don't know what you'd trade it for, then buckle up. This podcast is for you. I'm glad you're here. Let's get started. I'm going to see all of you along the Normal 40 Highway. If you're here now and you're listening to this podcast, this probably isn't the first podcast you've ever listened to. And you know that we talk about this awkward place in life where you arrive at this intersection of having so much of what you've chased, but at the same time, arriving at this same unfortunate discovery that it doesn't feel like it's supposed to, or it should, or it doesn't feel like you're trying to make it look on the outside. And we're going to go deeper on that with you in your book, Steve, but I'm going to start this podcast where I start all my podcasts, and it's right here. I want you to tell me what was going on in your life in the third grade.
That is a great question. Third grade, I think my father moved a couple times, maybe 3 times growing up, and I think we had just moved to Chicago. So third grade, I really was just meeting new friends, meeting new people. We moved from Chicago to Trumbull, Connecticut, and so yeah, I was in a year of transition probably that year. That was my first time ever moving in my life. So yeah, that's where I was at the time.
And what were you wrestling with in third grade? Give me a story of mischief, of sadness, of joy. Just give me a story of the flavor of your life in third grade, man.
You know, for me at that age, it was a big transition, just having to make new friends again, and starting all over socially. So I think that's what I remember most about third grade. Um, I remember my parents going into the school and meeting my homeroom teacher, and but I think from a social perspective, that's what would jump out from that year. That was the biggest year of, or my first big year of social change and kind of starting over, if you will.
Well, there's a spoiler alert for anybody who's listening. We're going to talk about Steve's journey through a diagnosis he received early in life, and so we're gonna work our way up and into that. But I'm curious to know, what was life like for you before diagnosis? Just describe your childhood and what made it normal and what made it different. And what we just need to know about you is just a kid growing up in Connecticut, um, just trying to make your way.
Yeah, probably very normal in Connecticut from 8 to 12 years old. Very normal. Had a group of friends, always hung out in the neighborhood. That was pre-smartphones, and you get home from school, you jump on your bike, and you knew it was time to come home when it got dark outside. So pretty normal. And then we moved to Atlanta, where again I kind of had to start over again socially. And like I said, that was 7th grade, and there was no middle school in Atlanta, so I had like a final year of elementary school as a very old elementary kid, and then went straight into high school in 8th grade. So that was a big adjustment. But I would say, Lon, to answer your question there, probably my freshman year I started with alcohol. So I started drinking some as a freshman. Um, even did a little bit more of that, actually right after 7th grade. So I kind of started with partying at an early age, and then by my sophomore year, was doing a lot more drinking in my like after school and things like that. By my junior year, I kind of fell in with a crowd, and it for 2 years, all that was important to me was partying, drinking, social. It's kind of funny where you started with this and that. Third grade, I was struggling and starting over and fitting in socially. But by my junior and senior year, I was partying all the time. I would say a lot more than most kids my age. And by my senior year, I was just headed down a really bad path. I think I wrecked my parents' cars 5 times under the influence of something. And when I was graduating high school, I was set to go to a college where some of my buddies were going. Those were not good influences for me. And so, yeah, my life was headed down a pretty bad path, candidly. And And I enjoyed it. I mean, ironically, high school, I enjoyed a lot of high school. I enjoyed the social aspect. I enjoyed skipping school and partying and the group that I hung out with. I mean, we had a lot of great times, but I was kind of spiraling downward and wasn't self-aware enough to realize the path I was going down. And then what you alluded to kind of intervened. But that was high school for me, man. It was kind of a gradual slope downward. If you ever saw Breaking Bad, I forget the main guy's name, but that was me.
Walter White,
Yeah, Walter. I was Walter White, just kind of
Mr.
spiraling
White.
down. Yeah, not realizing that I was headed down a really bad path. I wasn't quite that bad as Walter White, but yeah, the point was I was headed down a path and really wasn't stopping myself or making good decisions.
So seventh grade, man. How do you tell me about the first time you must have snuck out? You must have snuck something and said and convinced yourself or somebody convinced you this is a good idea. Let's try this. What was going on there?
I think for a lot of people, right, it's they probably first try something like that with a friend's older sibling or their own older sibling. And so I was first time I ever did anything that I shouldn't have been doing at that age. A friend of mine is his family had a beach house actually, and he had an older sister, and the older sister and her boyfriend were going to go to the beach house for the weekend and took us. And this was summer before seventh grade, so we got there the first night and drank, and then the second night we ended up smoking stuff that was not legal, and that was the summer before seventh grade. So.
Dude, you were
Um,
12.
I was 12. Yeah, I was 12. And it was an older sibling. Like I had never thought about it. That was never something I had wanted to do or was planning on doing. Just got there. I was 12 years old. Had these two, I don't know if they were 17 or 18, but um, yeah, I guess they thought it was funny and we participated or partaked and yeah. So, and then I probably went a couple years without doing anything after that, Lon. But like I said, my freshman year is probably when I started drinking, but it started that summer before seventh grade.
So as you fast forward with this, we move through the gap of, okay, we tried it in seventh grade and um, clearly it was impressionable. You can remember who and where and what. Um, and then you pick it up again as a sophomore. What was going on in your world then when you kind of said, yeah, you know what? Let's try this again.
I think this was back in what, 84, 83, something like that. And my sophomore year, just started hanging out with a new group of friends, more popular kids at school. Again, I had this when I was in 12th, or sorry, when I was 12 going into eighth grade, we moved again to Atlanta and basically had to start over again. I had, maybe a couple good friends my eighth grade year and then my ninth grade year. But I'd say my sophomore year just started hanging out with more, popular kids, and we would drink, and it was more on the weekend, and that's kind of where it started my sophomore year. It wasn't a lot. We didn't get into a lot of trouble. It was my junior year where that really ratcheted up. But yeah, to answer your question, just I think I did it because when I was 12, I did it because a couple older siblings pulled it out and offered it to us, and then just didn't really touch it again for a couple of years until I hung it. It was always revolved around the people I was hanging out with, and so my sophomore year, I would do it here and there, but it was my junior year where it really picked up.
Would you say that at any point it was beyond recreational and it was becoming something that was really becoming ingrained in who you were and how you were seen and how you wanted to behave?
Yeah, I think it was headed down that path. I think there was a start of that probably my senior year. But yes, I think I was starting to go down that path. Definitely headed in that direction.
Look, the 80s was before my time, but everybody I talked to who grew up in that time frame talks about how different it was and how available things were. I mean, it's so different than today and even different than when it was when I grew up in the 90s. But it kind of leads us right into your book in chapter 2. I mean, it plants us squarely there. And I'll tell you, Steve, I get asked to read a lot of books, and I sometimes struggle to find the time to get to them. And I picked up your book, and I was going through the same emotion of, okay, well, I've got to read this book. I committed to doing it. I'm doing it and we're going to do a podcast on it. I've committed to doing that. So I started reading, and I got to chapter 2, titled "It Started with a Crash." And I got to 2 paragraphs in, and all of a sudden my thoughts of I'm not so sure I'm doing anyone a favor turned off. I quickly turned to, this is interesting. It's relatable. The ages might be different, but it's relatable. It's impactful. And I can see, and it was interesting to me because it's a book about cancer. It's a book about survival. But the title, "It Started with a Crash," had nothing to do with cancer. It had nothing to do, but yet it was an integral part of your story. And if you don't mind, take us back to that experience, that time, and bring us through where you were at in your life and what was going on all the way through that moment.
Yeah. So, when you have something like cancer, I think you spend a lot of time, asking, what did I do to cause this? And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out, like, what did I do? I grew up Catholic, so there's there's always been this guilt, and I felt guilty, and I felt like I had caused or done a lot of things to cause my cancer. I also read a great book called Getting Well Again, which really dives into kind of the mental aspects like stress, anxiety, things like that, that play into not only getting sick, but then getting healthy and fighting disease. So I guess in my thought process as I was battling cancer and then later, it my path spiraling downward really kind of started with a crash my junior year in high school. Went out drinking. It was my first party that I had ever attended. So the times you asked about in summer before seventh grade and then, eighth grade, that was always just a group of a couple friends, right? My junior year was my first party I attended, beginning of the school year, probably over 200 people there. And I was like, I fell in love with, the parties and that atmosphere. But that evening was also my first time really experimenting with liquor. And so a friend and I were just chasing liquor, and next thing I knew, the lights went out, and I woke up the next morning in the back seat of my mother's car, which I had wrecked, and my friend had wrecked it as well. So we wrecked it twice in an evening. Thank goodness nobody was hurt. There were no other cars involved. But yeah, we woke up the next morning and then had to go home and explain extensive damage to the car, in addition to why I never called home. And my parents had been up all night calling local hospitals and the police. And so that was kind of the start, I think, of my
Where was the
rebellion.
car physically? So if you guys were in the car and they were looking for you, when you came to, where was the car physically sitting?
So the car was physically sitting in front of the party, in front of the house where the party had been hosted. It was a kid from my high school. His parents were out of town. He threw a big party. I think it just got out of control.
Man, this is a
But
classic 1980s movie, right?
it was,
Right
yeah,
here. If you'd
yeah,
had an exchange student fall on top of you out of a tree, I mean, we've nailed it.
yeah, absolutely. It was a wild party. It was a wild evening. I met my high school girlfriend that night. We would end up dating for 2, 3 years on and off. But a lot happened that evening. So we left that night and went to go eat somewhere. And I wrecked the car on the way there, and then my friend wrecked it on the way back to the party. And I think by the time we got back to the party, everybody or most everybody had left. So we both he slept in the front seat, I slept in the back. I don't remember much of that at all. And then woke up the next morning, parked on a street in a cul-de-sac in front of the house where the party had been.
You'd mentioned that you'd wrecked more than one car, maybe not wrecked, but gotten in an accident with more than once.
Mhm.
Was this the first, second, third, or fourth of those incidences?
This was the very first, the most extensive damage, definitely the worst one, but yeah, it was the first one. So
So
the
this
the
happened again. So it wasn't like there was, okay, lesson learned. Dear God, I'm never gonna do this again. I'm never drinking again. I'm swearing off of drugs and alcohol. The things we've all done. That even if you did it, it didn't stick, is what I'm hearing.
No, no, it did
Okay,
not.
but I,
Yeah.
I have to ask this because if I'm a listener, I've got to know. So you come to, what's your buddy's name in the front seat?
I'll just say John. I don't
John.
use real names in the book a
That's
lot.
cool.
Just yeah, just to protect the
Cool. No,
innocent or guilty.
I'm not looking to get anybody in real trouble, but there's a dude in the front seat
Yep.
who you recognize and know. You're in the back seat. The car's in bad shape, and you know it. It's your parents' car. You've lost track of time. You come to sometime in the morning. You look around. Clearly, the party's over. You've got bad breath, bad wrecked car, and wrinkled clothes. And you think to yourself, "Oh man, I got to go home and tell my parents." What did you? How did you go home? I mean, you drove home, I'm sure, but tell me about coming home and telling your parents. What was that about? How did that go?
Uh, Yeah, it was awful because I was hungover. I was very concerned. I knew my parents would be upset about the car, but I already knew I was in trouble for not coming home. I was expected home that night before. My parents said, if you're going to be late, call. Again, this was pre cell phones, so I never called home, never let them know. And today I've got two grown kids, Lon, and I've thought about that many times about what I would do if they had done that to me. And so I empathize a lot with my parents and what I put them through, not only that night, but over the course of a couple of years. Um, but headed back to the house to tell them, I was racking my brain, which hurt even more. Because I had a headache from a hangover, but racking my brain trying to figure out, like, what am I going to tell them? What story could I come up with? There really wasn't a story. I ended up leaving my friend John. I kind of left him out. I left out the part that there were two accidents. Just thought it would keep it simple, keep him out of trouble. And they knew that there must have been alcohol involved for me not to come home. I think my father's first thought was, was anybody else involved? Was anybody hurt? Uh, but yeah, it was tough going back and telling them. And I think they went from relieved seeing me walk in the door to, pretty quickly seeing the damage, and then it kind of registering that I was probably out making trouble, and what I had put them through. And, then there was anger. So there was this shift of emotions after I told them, but it was pure dread driving, the 15, 20 minutes home, trying to think of what I was going to tell them when I got back.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to Normal 40 the podcast. I just wanted to let you know that one of the questions I get asked all the time is, okay, what's next? I'm here, I'm listening. Your content is good, the podcasts are great, but what can I really do? And I tell people, I've created a community for you. And I don't advertise it very much, but I'm going to advertise it here. The community is called The Insider. If you go to my website, normal40.com, click on communities, The Insider is $25 a month, and you can cancel after the first month or after the first year or after the first decade. It's a month to month conversation. And every day I'm in there and we're communicating in a forum. And every other Thursday, we have office hours where I'm in there and the whole community shows up and we support one another through their journey. I want you to check it out. If you use code Insider Access, the first month is on me. Go to normal40.com, check out The Insider, and I'm going to see all of you on the inside. All right. I'll get you back to the podcast. Thanks for being here. I'll see all of you on the next page. How does this story, you chose to put this story into your early in your book to kind of set who you were up at this point in life. How does this story play into what eventually is going to be the diagnosis? And that is the question I want you to answer, but let me just set this up for people who are just tuning in the first time. After hundreds and hundreds of calls with people just like you, Steve, I've come to learn that there are a set of D's that really shake people into this new way of seeing the world. One is drinking. If you drink too much and you have something happen to you, like happened to you, that can change your perspective. It can shock you, hopefully without harming someone else, which was true for you there. It can shock you. Another one is you can have a death near you. Somebody you know very well and love passes and it shocks you. Another one's a diagnosis, and we're going to get into that one very obviously. And then there's downsizing and divorce are the D's that will shake you. So now you've got a couple of these. You've been drinking. It has impacted it is impacting you, and it's impacted the people around you. But you're still at the stage of kind of denial, another D, that the curse of invincibility as a teenager that we all have and had, and it's just a fact of life. But you chose to put this in the book as it leads into and establishes where you were as it leads into your next D, which is a diagnosis. And I'm wondering if you can tie out this conversation coming home, presenting them with your parents with their car, and kind of what happened next, which leads us into this diagnosis.
Yeah. So over the course of that 2 years, I guess, from the two of the D's you mentioned, the drinking and driving to the diagnosis. I think the friend who was in the front seat of that car and I became close. We had a couple other friends that kind of joined our group. It became a group. And, I would say that our group, and I have a name for the group. I won't share it. You can read the book to get that. But the group basically partied at a level, I think, more than most people in our high school. We sought to get in trouble. The individual in the front seat and I, we got a lot of attention for this car wreck, right? Like when we came into school that next Monday, word spread quickly through the school that we had kind of taken it up a notch, that we had had this accident, that we didn't go home. And it was kind of a big deal. And so we got a lot of attention, and probably at some level that maybe we really didn't think about. We both enjoyed that. And so this group just found ways to get in trouble. We skipped school, we drank, we went to parties. And I think over the course of 2 years that it became more frequent. It happened sometimes before school where we would start to party or do things. And so it continued to escalate. And I think this group, Lon, that I was hanging out with, we all enjoyed, like we had fun doing it. I know that's bad to say, and I would never want my kids to have done what I did, but we enjoyed it. We enjoyed the attention. We had fun doing it, but it was bad. You know, I'm blessed that nobody ever did get hurt. To your point, we never hurt anybody, at least that I was involved with. Um, the accidents I mentioned were always with objects and not other vehicles or people. But yeah, it just like I mentioned earlier, it kept spiraling down and down. And I think that I would have failed out of college had I not had the diagnosis.
How bad did it get? If this wasn't
It
the
got
worst day where you wreck your parents' car and you wake up in a driveway after passing out, how bad did it get? What's
You
the
know, it's
story that you didn't put in the book that's like, son of a bitch? That
um,
was horrible.
I think that I would towards the end, Lon, I would say I don't know if it was one story, but I would drink a lot of liquor. I don't drink liquor anymore. I really haven't since my diagnosis. I'll drink beer and stuff, but liquor would creep up on me, and a lot of times I would black out. And I would say that that was happening more and more leading up to my diagnosis. I started smoking too. Back then you'd go. I think kids still do it. But you go to a party, you got a cigarette in one hand, a drink in the other. And so I had started smoking at parties, and then that became more regularly, I'd say the last few months before my diagnosis. I didn't have anything to do with my diagnosis, but again, just doing a lot of things that, making a lot of poor decisions that were happening more frequently and getting more severe leading up to my diagnosis.
Have you or did you ever go back since being I'll say an adult. That's a really clumsy way of saying later in life, and talk to your parents about the kid they were raising?
Um, I've talked I've talked to them about, yes, as an adult. Um, I guess to go back, I was at one point in my career, I had finished number one for the year, and I've always been in sales and sales leadership, and so my team had finished number one, and I had an opportunity to speak on stage in front of about 1,000 people, and my manager at the time knew that I was writing this book. This book's been in process for a long time, by the way. But she knew that I was writing this book, and she was like, "Hey, what would you think about taking the concept of your book?" Because she knew my story, and getting it down to about 15, 20 minutes and make that your speech. I think it would have an impact on folks. And so I said yes. And then she was pretty high up in the company, but she went to basically our CRO or chief sales officer, and he loved the idea, and he said yeah. And so then it was like, oh crap, I gotta tell this story in front of 1,000 people. And when I did that, I guess getting back to your question, I don't think I told my parents, but I had a recording of, back when CDs were how we would listen to music. I had that recording of my speech, and I sent it with a letter to my parents, basically apologizing for my behavior, but also sticking by me like parents do when times got tough and I got the diagnosis. I sent them a letter at Christmas, and I think that was my way of, one, apologizing for my behavior, and then two, thanking them for everything they did for me.
Before your diagnosis, but when you're in this place in life, do you remember what you wished for and hoped for in a future? Did you have career ambitions, career thoughts, things you wanted to do, or was it just kind of party to party, building my reputation, being the cool guy in the hall. Uh, just how did you think about your future?
I thought about Friday and Saturday night and whether there would be, a great party that I didn't want to miss. Just being candid. Yeah, my senior year, I didn't really think about that. My grades struggled. My attendance at school struggled. I wasn't thinking about a career. I wasn't really thinking about college too much. My thought about college was it would be an opportunity to get out of the house and have unlimited access to parties. I had seen the movie Animal House, and that's what I thought about. Just to be candid, there wasn't really any maturity or thinking about the future whatsoever.
Where were you headed? Had had something that come along and changed your perspective? Where do you think you may have headed?
I either would have, at a minimum, best case, I would have failed out of college. Worst case, I would have either probably killed myself or somebody else. And yeah, I firmly believe that it would have been somewhere in that scale or range.
Did you ever struggle with anxiety or depression?
Maybe a little bit. But no, I wouldn't say that either of those were strong. Maybe a little bit of anxiety. I would think my anxiety came typically more around, as I mentioned earlier, moving and starting over and that social aspect. But I would say my junior and senior year, not really, not too much. Depression, not really. I was having a good time.
Your habits that you're picking up, you kind of look back at that and you have decided that as you look back at that and the decisions you're making and the things you're doing, that was decisions you were making in pursuit of a good time only. So the question is this, was there anything below the surface that you're really also trying to escape?
That's a great question, Lon. I don't think so. I mean, my parents were great parents. They're still married today. They've been married for, I don't know, 60 years. We had a good, I had two siblings. Like we had a very normal, average middle age or middle income family. My dad was successful at work. Like there was no trauma growing up, or you mentioned one of the D's of death. Like it never had anybody close to me that passed. I wouldn't say there was any underlying. There's nothing I've ever been able to attribute kind of my behavior to. I think my sister grew up with great grades, stayed out of trouble. She's a doctor today. My brother owns his own business. He stayed out of trouble. There's really not an explanation for kind of why I did what I did. I think I'm definitely the most social of my siblings, and I think my social life was always more important. My sister was always very, studious and focused on the grades, and that's what was important to her. But yeah, there's nothing I can pinpoint. It'd be great if I had a excuse or a reason to kind of blame it on, but I never felt like there was anything driving me to do that. I enjoyed the friendships that I had, the people I was hanging out with, even though they weren't great influences. I was having a good time.
Well, if this was your podcast and you were interviewing me, I might have a few stories that assimilate with some of yours here. So, but
Oh yeah.
we're not going to go down that path. Let me just say that look, I can really appreciate and understand um, exactly what you're talking about here. But let's now move forward into the diagnosis. Kind of bring us into the week before, what was going on, and what happened.
Sure. So I had probably for, I don't know, a couple months. So with this behavior and kind of lifestyle I was living, there was a lot of friction, as you can imagine, with my parents.
So
And
give us an age. Where were you in
eight,
school?
I was 18. So I graduated high school. And in probably late June, I had this mass on the side of my neck. Actually, let me even back up. Probably in the spring of my senior year in high school, I would go out drinking and I would feel some tingling in my neck, nothing noticeable. I would ask friends, like, do you see anything? And I would find myself feeling it a lot because it just felt different, especially when I drank. And then I would say around the time I graduated in high school in May, there started to be a little bit of a notice of kind of a raised area. So if you looked at me, my neck was not, it started to protrude. And then we graduated high school probably early May. And by the end of May, June, it had started to become more noticeable. But my parents and I kind of ignored each other. I would work all day and then go out each evening partying. This was, again, summer of post senior year. and I was supposed to go off to Georgia Southern. I didn't end up going there, but I was going to go off to college. I was working full time, going out every single night without exception. And my parents and I just kind of were living in the same house, but ignored each other. And about a week before the diagnosis, I was at a friend's house, and his mother, he was in this group that I mentioned that, it was a group of four of us that would get in trouble. His mother was a nurse, and she looked at me and was like, "What's going on with your neck?" And she was clearly concerned. And she said, "There's something going on. Like, you need to go get that checked out." She started mentioning things that could be cancer, might have been one of them. And so she was like, "If you don't tell your parents," she said, "have your parents not noticed this?" And I said, "No, I'm working every day and I'm going out every night with your son. And no, I have not told them." And so she basically said, "You need to go home and tell them today. And if you don't, I will." And so I went home, told my mother. She looked at it. She was quickly concerned, took me to a urgent care. They didn't know what it was. They sent me to a ear, nose, and throat. They weren't sure what it is, recommended doing a biopsy. And so then July 3rd, summer after I graduated high school, I went in for the surgery, and then they removed a mass out of the side out of my neck. The surgeon said it was the size of a grapefruit, hence the name of my book. And my grape, or I'm sorry, it was a grapefruit. I always say grapefruit now because of the title of my book, but they took out a mass out of the side of my neck, the size of a grapefruit, and called me on July 4th and said, you've got cancer. And so that was my diagnosis, but it happened pretty quickly. That week before was, my friend's mom, and then a couple doctor's appointments, and then this biopsy on July 3rd.
Take us to the moment when the doctor calls and says, Steve has cancer. Tell me
So the
about that.
phone, yeah, my father was off work because it was a holiday, obviously. And we were all waiting for the call. My brother and sister were home, and I wasn't really worried. You mentioned the word invincible earlier, that, we're at that age. Most of us think we're invincible. The surgeon had told us prior to the biopsy there was a 30% chance that it could be cancer. So as you can imagine, that freaked out my parents. They never said it or showed it. They told me later. It did not concern me at all. I just thought I was invincible. I thought cancer was for old people. Just never thought that was a serious threat. So the phone rings. My mom and I pick up phones in different rooms, and the surgeon was like, "I'll cut to the chase," and said, "You have cancer." And my parents must have given him a little bit of background, because he quickly said, "No alcohol, no drinking, no drugs." And he said, "For the next year, potentially ever again. And you'll need to talk to your oncologist to get more details about that, but definitely no drinking." And my mind just basically, like, I was just to give you an idea of where I was in life, I was upset about the no drinking. The cancer, wasn't concerned about that. It was like the parents in the Peanuts commercial. I say this in my book, it was like, wah, wah, wah. I didn't hear anything the surgeon said after he said no drinking for a year. My mom started crying. And so we got off the call after a few minutes. We all gathered around the dining room table, and my mom was emotional. My brother was emotional. I think my father he's more analytical, was processing things. And then I say, my sister is a doctor now. I think this was a sign at an early age that she could deliver news without being emotional. She kind of sat there, and I know she cared, but she sat there and didn't really show any emotion. But yeah, the whole time we sat there, Lon, I kept thinking, like, how's this going to affect my social life? How's it going to affect going off to college? How am I going to deal with not drinking? That's where my head was at. Pretty sad.
What, in 1980s, it seems like, so a cancer diagnosis in the 1980s had a more grim outlook, um, than it does today. Medicine's come so far in the last few decades. And and it seems like, and look, it's just my perspective. I don't have any proof of this, but it seems like years ago, young people, you said cancer for old people, and I do kind of think that cancer in young people tends. It seems like it just didn't happen back then. It certainly didn't happen in my childhood with people I know. So how? So now I want you to help us just kind of go through the next series of days. How did you, uh, did you, well, let me just ask you this. After your diagnosis, before spending any time toiling over the prognosis, did you go back out and drink with your friends before you actually started treatment?
I did not. I came close. I did not. I went to, and I don't remember if this was after I saw the oncologist or not, but it was within the first 2, 3 weeks of being diagnosed. I did go to a party, and I struggled that evening. I ended up, it was kind of a weak moment. I ended up dipping, Copenhagen, chewing tobacco. And my friends talked me into it because they were like, well, they didn't say you couldn't do, you know, dip. And so, and that's, and so I justified it in my head. Well, yeah, that's true. They didn't say I couldn't dip. And so I did that, and they had put a little bit of alcohol in the dip. And later that evening, I had it like another moment I talk about in the book that was like, I have to leave this life behind. There's no way that I'm going to be able to, try to continue it in a modified fashion. I don't have the willpower. I don't have the discipline. I need to put my focus, and my friends are obviously not a good influence. I need to put the focus on getting well again. But that was the closest I came. And I felt, again, that Catholic guilt. I felt guilt the rest of the evening. I drove home that night, kind of had a aha moment of, I need to get my act together and I need to leave that world behind. So, yeah, that's the closest I came.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning into the Normal 40 podcast. My name is Lon Stroshine, founder of the Normal 40, and I'm super glad you're here. Hey, really quick, by now you know it's my mission to inspire the change in 1,000 lives. And you know that this podcast is just one of the ways I'm doing it. You can also go to my website, normal40.com, and sign up for my free newsletter that comes directly to your inbox. Now, it's not really a newsletter in the sense that you're going to find much news in it. It's just letters from me to you, man, right where you are on your journey. The topics are going to vary from week to week, and I might have a guest article from time to time, but the intent of the Rambler is to meet you right where you're at, and I hope you sign up. You can also sign up for the 14 questions that changed my life. These are questions you can answer for yourself, but these are the questions I wrestled with when I was right where you are. Just a couple other things really quick. A few weeks ago, I launched my book called The Trade, and The Trade within minutes was an Amazon #1 bestseller in multiple categories, and it remains there to this day. I would love it if you'd go buy the book, not because you're going to get something out of me when you read it. It's because the book is going to get something out of you when you read it. Lastly, I've got a closed group off LinkedIn that I call the Insider, and this is where I hang out. I hang out a few times a month in cohorts and in one-on-one calls, and you can come in there and you can join the Insider and you can see for yourself that you are not alone. I would love to see you in there. Look, last thing I'll say is if you're here and this podcast is resonating with you and you can feel something burbling up, I want you to know that you are ready. You are here not because an algorithm. You are here because you are ready. And I want to help you see you through to the other side. Everyone, thanks for being here. Check out the other episodes, and I'm going to see you a little further down the road. Well, that you just mentioned the last D I talk about in The Trade, and that's a decide. You at some point you have to decide. You're going to stay in your old life or build a new one. And it sounds to me like that was your moment when you decided that um, the the future that you thought you were going to have 3 months before that no longer is the future you have available to you, and it's now no longer the cards you're holding, and you've got a new journey in front of you. So let's talk about the oncologist and the treatments and kind of all of that, all of all of the change that you saw around you. And what I want you to key into is who showed up for you that you didn't expect along the way.
Yeah, two great questions in there. So I think to start with, you mentioned it, cancer back in the 80s was different. It's awful today. Like, I don't want to downplay that, but I think back then the medication was to cure it was not where it is today. And number two, the side effects. I think they're able to. There's been a lot of progress in being able to control those side effects today versus when I had it. But one thing that has always stuck with me is the oncologist told me the first time I met him, he said, and this was in 1986, he told me in 1970 or prior, I'd be telling you to get your things in order and you'd have less than a year to live. So in just that 16 years, it went from it would have been a death sentence to I had an 85% chance. They ended up doing tests and figured out it was in my neck, chest, and stomach, which made it stage 3. And so they decided to treat it with chemotherapy. But it also gave me an 85% chance. I think stage 1 would have been a 95%, stage 2, 90%. But I was in an 85%. Stage 4 would have dropped to 50%. So 85% versus a death sentence 16 years prior. But that next year was, I mean, hell is probably the best way to describe it. So the chemotherapy would make me really nauseous for a good 12 to 18 hours where I couldn't really leave the bathroom, just puking till there was nothing left and then, puking more. I lost my hair. I had a lot of side effects. I had mouth sores that that would get really bad, make it difficult to eat and drink as well. So it was about 9, 10 months that I went through chemo. I would say the worst part was the mental part, which is kind of where I start my book, where I was at probably the bottom. Um, but yeah, it was the mental part. What I mean by that, Lon, is that you know, the first treatment I ever had, I didn't get sick. And I thought, okay, this is going to be easy. This is not going to be hard. Again, old people struggle with this, but I'm young. I can fight this, no problem. The second one was much different. I mean, I was throwing up before I was done with the drugs took about 45 minutes they would hook you up to an IV and you'd have to sit there for about 45 minutes. I was throwing up before that 45 minutes was done. And each one got progressively worse, and I would get more and more sick, and the side effects got worse. But the mental aspect of trying to pick myself up and have the fortitude to go in for another, treatment, it was every 2 weeks. So for a few days before those, I wouldn't be able to sleep. Maybe that was the stress and anxiety you asked me about. But yeah, it was awful, and I got to a point where I didn't think I could do it anymore. And so yeah, that was the rough part. And like I said, I think it's come a long way. Cancer is still a terrible thing, but back then a lot of those side effects they just they weren't able to treat as much. You realize who your friends are pretty quick in a situation like that. But family's usually there for you. My parents, I guess you'd expect your parents to be there for you in most cases, but after the 2 years that I put them through, that I shared earlier, and there were a lot more stories I could share with you. I mean, I put them through a lot. They just did a 180. I mean, when I say that, they showed up, they were there, they loved me. They kind of put those 2 years behind us. It was like they never happened. And so my parents were first and foremost. My brother and sister, for the most part, they just stayed out of the way. Like there were no more sibling fights. There was no more, petty squabbles. They were much better behaved than me, which allowed my parents to focus on helping me get better, which I really appreciate. And then I had two buddies from high school that were just angels in different ways, but they helped me through that a lot in many different ways. They took me to some treatments. They would pick me up when I needed it. They just stuck by me, and they were both groomsmen in my wedding, and I was groomsmen in theirs. But most of my other friends from high school, especially the ones that were not real good influences, were those friendships died the day I was diagnosed. I did go to a party the evening I was diagnosed. Didn't drink a thing. I had a big bandage on my neck, and I could tell by people's reactions and responses to cancer that those friendships would probably end. Um, but two friends that really stood by me. I had extended family that were great, would check in and send things. But the other person to call out, there was a nurse. I switched oncologists during my treatment, which is another story, another chapter in the book. But the nurse at my first oncologist was unbelievable. She ended up becoming a friend, and unfortunately, I didn't keep in touch with her after I left and switched oncologists. But she was fantastic and just, would clean up my puke every time I was there, was so nice, so patient, would ask me about anything to keep my mind off the drugs and what was coming. Just showed so much care and empathy during that process. But those would be some of the heroes of my story over the course of that year.
Do you remember the nurse's name?
I do. I think I changed her name in the book too. So I consulted with an attorney on some of this stuff for the first part of my book, where I was more of a troublemaker and was told to use some pseudonym names. But yeah, I do remember her name. I won't share it, but she was great. She was fantastic. I've tried to find her, Lon, because I don't know her last name, and I've not been able to find her. I would love nothing more than to thank her. The story about sending my parents that letter with my speech, I did the same thing for my brother, my sister, and then these two close buddies of mine. And I wanted to do it for the nurse, and never could find her. I've looked recently writing my book, and I just don't go off of.
Well, I can completely understand not wanting to share her name on a podcast, but you might want to get a second opinion from an attorney because I cannot see that any downside that would outweigh the upside of her hearing from you, you sharing your story, sharing the book, telling her she's in it, telling her she had an impact. Not only would that change her life, it might change yours. And I really encourage you to get another opinion from another attorney because I think you're missing a fantastic chapter of your life.
Yeah, yeah, I appreciate that. And sh her name may be in the book, but I think I changed it. I just, because some of the stories I share in the book, I wanted to change some of the names, but and I had an attorney who recommended some of it um, was was needed to change.
At what point through your cancer journey did it dawn on you that you were going to come out of this changed? Was there a moment when something kind of hit you? Now, by now, you're realizing who your friends were and were not. You're realizing the gift you've got in family. You're going through these painful, lonely experiences that other kids didn't understand, couldn't relate to, and probably didn't even want to. And so there you are now, not the cool kid in the hallways who knows how to throw a good party. You're the sick kid with cancer who's trying to survive. How, when did it dawn on you that you were going to come out of this changed?
So not at all during cancer. I think I had tunnel vision on trying to get through it and get better. My aha moment for that was so I finished up treatment, and in the spring of what would have been my freshman year in college, I took some courses at the local community college, but so then I went off to the University of Georgia that fall for what was my first year going off to school. I had kind of partial credits from the community college, went up there, joined a fraternity, really went into it, Lon, knowing that I need to make better decisions, but I still want to have a good time in college. I still want to go experience that. So as I mentioned, I didn't do, I didn't participate in any liquor. I was more careful with, still had a good time, but more careful with my drinking. And that Christmas of, it would have been 1987, I was going home for break, and one of my pledge brothers was talking about Christmas and said something about a movie called It's a Wonderful Life. And I was like, what's that? And he was shocked. He was like, "You've never seen It's a Wonderful Life?" And I said, "No." And so I went to Blockbuster, which is also dating me a little bit because they're no more. But I went to Blockbuster and I rented it as soon as I got home. And I started watching it. I'm like, okay, this is a black and white movie. There's no action. I can see why I never stopped surfing channels long enough to watch this movie. But I started watching it. And have you seen the movie, Lon?
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah, so the movie resonated for me because George Bailey, right? He's doesn't appreciate anything in his life. He takes everything for granted, kind of more of a glass half empty. And then this angel gives him a wish to see what life would be like if he had never been born. And for me, I just felt like my angel was cancer, or gave me cancer, and that I was able to get a wake up call. And when I was off at college that first fall semester, I think everybody enjoyed college and everybody had a great time at Georgia, again, back in the 80s, going to football games and parties and socials and date nights and all that. It was a blast. But I felt like I was on cloud nine and appreciated it more than the average person because of what I had just been through months prior. And when I watched that movie, I was like, this resonates with me. Like this is, for me, there's a before and there's an after, just like there was for George Bailey. He would be forever changed by that experience of seeing what life was like without him. And so, and I talk about the movie in my book. I use it to kind of shift from the prior life to the new life after cancer. But that was my aha moment to answer you, was when I knew my life had changed and I could do something different. I could be a better person. Even though I was 6 months, 8 months past cancer, watching that movie helped frame that up for me. And I think I started viewing my experience with cancer more from a positive standpoint after that.
At what point in that process did you gain some clarity then on what it is you did want to do with the rest of your life now that you have a rest of your life?
Yeah, it was a gradual process over a few years where I think I started to think about a lot of these things, but I started thinking about having a more of a glass half full mentality. I've tried to do that with my family. I've been in leadership roles for a long time. I try to do that, and in sales, um, is having a glass half full perspective. I would say that I started, like, empathy really jumped out to me, that when I was going through all this, a lot of people would maybe see me at a party, in the beginning, or they might see me at the grocery store and not know what I was going through. And I think about that all the time, right? Is, somebody flips you off on the road, right? You cut them off, or there's some altercation. You don't know what that person's going through and what they're experiencing. And I think my cancer journey gives me that perspective of, I try to be very empathetic. Gratitude, is another kind of theme that I, over time, realized that cancer gave me a higher sense of being grateful. And I try to manage that way. I try to manage people that way, lead teams that way. I have parented that way. So those would be, I guess, a few ways that, again, it wasn't overnight watching that movie, but that movie kind of, just like the car crash started my downward spiral, that movie kind of started a journey for me of maybe self-awareness and trying to think about, like, how do I want to leverage cancer as a positive.
One of the things that I think people struggle with, and I can put myself in this category of people who struggle with it, is when we either have somebody we know who's diagnosed, or we see somebody who we maybe don't know, but clearly has a cancer diagnosis. They're going through some things. We sometimes don't know what to say, so we make a bunch of bad decisions, like avoiding them and not saying anything. And it's not to be rude, it's not to be distant, it's just easier to avoid. What did If you have any advice for somebody or encouragement or whatever, what do you wish as you went through it? What did people do in a positive way that you'd encourage others to do that was helpful to you when you were going through it?
That's a deep question. I guess the first thing I would think of is my, I would say just be there, right? Because I think people handle tragedy in many different ways. Some people don't want to talk about it or don't want to share, but I think just being there for people, when you know somebody's going through something or you can tell they're going through something, I think being there for them, and don't expect them to talk or to share if they don't want to, but just the people I appreciate today that were there for me, they were just there for me for whatever I needed. If I needed to talk to somebody, they listened well. My two buddies from high school, I had partied with them some. They really weren't in that group that um, I got into a lot of trouble with. But when the what hit the fan, I mean, they listened. Um, they drove me to school. They drove me to work. We would have great conversations when I felt like talking. If I didn't want to talk about it, they would just be there. And so I think that's probably first and foremost, because you don't always know how somebody wants to handle something like that, whether it's a divorce or a job loss or a sickness of some kind. Um, I think I would start with just being there and then let that person kind of dictate how they want you to be there. But being there is the first step, showing up.
You mentioned early in the conversation that um, your family, you grew up Catholic, and so there's an element of faith. Um, I'm curious to know how your faith journey changed, developed, grew as you went through this process, all the way up to where you are now.
Yeah, it's funny, it's not funny about how quickly you turn to God when something like that happens. In high school I didn't pray much, probably went to church less. I would say my relationship with God was fairly uh, non-existent in high school. And and then when you get a cancer diagnosis or something similar to that, you start off saying, why God? Why me? And I think, most people go down that path. I was no exception. And then I was, probably angry at God for a short period of time. There's a chapter in my book. My girlfriend at the time talked me into going to a healing service, which sounds crazy explaining it. But it was at the Omni in Atlanta, which is where the Atlanta Hawks basketball team used to play. All the concerts used to be there. And this priest, he filled the Omni. It was full. It was a packed house, and I didn't want to go. I was talked into going. My girlfriend's father at the time had had a heart attack or a couple heart attacks, and that's why their family was very religious. And so I went, and I went from being kind of a non-believer in what I was seeing to believing and experiencing something there that was spiritual, that was moving, and that changed my relationship with God, moving forward. But I would say it was the cancer diagnosis that kind of brought me closer to God, and then it was this intervention of getting me to a healing service that was an experience in itself that changed me. And yeah, I would say that's how my relationship with God was changed.
As you launch your book and people pick it up and read it and you talk about it, you promote it, what are just one or two of the key themes that you want to be really sure that they don't miss? The things that you want to be really sure stick out in your words, in your language, in your speech, that they just really need to key into.
I would say and it's my hope around the impact that my book can make. It's giving people hopefully they walk out looking at adversity and things we go through in life. It's not a question of if something bad's going to happen to us. It's a question of when. We all go through. You mentioned the different D's. We all go through rough patches in life and run into challenges. I think for me, cancer helped me look at those differently, approach them differently, and try to grow and transform from those. Um, that's what I'm hoping the book does. That's what I'm hoping people walk away with is maybe a little bit different perspective, a little bit more of a glass half full way of looking at, death, divorce, downsizing, the D's you mentioned, or whatever else it is. That's what I'm really hoping that the book does for people.
You said something fascinating just a few minutes ago when we were talking about um, George Bailey and A Wonderful Life. You said it turns out my angel gave me cancer. That's a pretty profound perspective. And I'm wondering if you can just put a bow on this entire podcast and this time we've had talking about you, your story, your book, and what you want to do with your story. Yeah, I don't know if it'll make the podcast, but you and I talked off the top about one of the things I'm continuing to study, and it's this premise of a second resume. And it's the second resume is this thing that we all have. And if I want to know your first resume, I'll look at LinkedIn and I'll look at everything you put out there, you write about, you share. It's under your control and it's all image based. And it's not bad. It is not bad. It's great, in fact. It's a 10 of 10. It's the stuff you want people to know. But then below that is there's this second resume. And it's all the stuff that you wish hadn't happened. You wish you hadn't gone through, the decisions you wish you wouldn't have made, all of the people who treated you poorly and you don't want to talk about. It's all there. And it's in your second resume. And you learn at some point in your life that while it's there and you've worked decades to try to get away from it, there's incredible power there. And in that second resume are all the ingredients of the things that people who are behind you, who are currently in a troubled situation, need. They need that knowledge. They need that wisdom. They need to know that they can get through it. They need to know how to survive it. And you slowly pull these things out of your second resume at a certain point in your life and you hand them over one at a time. And I feel like your book is kind of your taking ownership over your second resume in this wonderful way. I mean, when you can say things like, my angel gave me cancer, and here's what I did with it. Here's what cancer gave me. Here's how I used it. And you're taking the second resume stuff, the diagnosis you didn't ask for, the one you never would have signed up to get. how it's changed you, and now you're using it, hopefully to be the answer to somebody else's prayer who needs it at a point in their journey when they need it. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the premise, the mindset, and what you hope this book does under the guise of My Angel Gave Me Cancer.
Yeah, I have enjoyed that kind of first career you talk about. I've enjoyed coaching, managing, developing people. I've always gotten a lot of satisfaction out of that. I do think some of it comes from my experience with cancer and the people that showed up for me and helped me. I think it gave me a sense of trying to give back and do the same for other people. And so I've always really enjoyed that in my career. I've loved hiring people that end up buying their first house or, getting married, but reaching levels of success that maybe they never thought they could. So, I'm hoping, hopefully this answers your question, Lon. I'm hoping with this book that it gives me more abilities. My kids are grown now, they're out of the house. My wife's got her own business. I don't golf or fish. And so I'm hoping this book opens up more doors to be able to do that, to be able to coach and develop other people. I did an early release program on Kickstarter. It's a platform to introduce something like a book. And so part of what I did there was there's different levels that people can purchase. And I had a few people purchase having me come in and speak to their company. And so I think I've got 3 of those. And I really enjoyed that I mentioned earlier that I did that in front of 1,000 people. I'd like to do that again, where I can share that message and my experience and hopefully have an impact on the way people look at adversity, as I mentioned earlier. I also get a lot of calls from people wanting help with their LinkedIn or their resume or compensation negotiation advice. And I think I'm pretty good at those things and interviews. And so I'm hoping this opens the door to do more of that. I get a lot of requests from people I've worked with in the past or friends. My niece called me over the weekend trying to get help with some of these things. And so I, I'm hoping it opens the door to do a lot more of that where I can have an impact on people because I enjoy that. It's something I'm passionate about.
I
Does
love it.
that, does that answer your question?
It sure does. How is is the book out now? Can I go to Amazon and buy it?
So it's pre-order on Amazon digital. It releases March 11th, and Amazon doesn't do pre-orders for paperback or hardback, but it'll be available March 11th in hard copy. But digital, you can go in and pre-order now, and I've already got some of those. So yeah, I'm excited about it.
All right. Well, March 11th. This podcast will probably come out around that time anyway. So by the time this comes out, you'll be able to buy your book, Grapefruit, Greatfruit, and now we know what it stands for. And how do people find you if they want to connect with you, talk to you, email you, just learn more about how to hire you if they're interested in having you come in to give a message that's inspiring, using your words, inspiring and motivating and impactful. How do they find you?
Yeah, so stevegarraty.com. A lot of people want to spell it ITY, but it's ATY. So it's Steve, GARRATY.com. And they can follow me on there, get updates. They can purchase the book. There's a link to the Amazon page. They can read my story and the description of the book. So yeah, stevegarraty.com is the best place to do that.
All right, man. Well, thanks so much for sharing your story. Thanks for writing a fantastic book and
Thank you, Lon.
for being brave enough to share all of your story and for using your second resume in a way that matters, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on your show. Really enjoyed it. And I'm really enjoying your book. So thank you.
Absolutely, man. I'll see you on the next page.
Sounds good. Thanks.